It is now time for our sponsor segment, which will start with a short video from NFIB.
Motivated,
ambitious,
hardworking,
resilient. Americans' millions of small businesses are the foundation of our economy.
The 20% small business tax deduction allows us to compete with the larger corporations.
allows us to hire more employees.
Allows us to attract new customers. Unfortunately, this deduction is expiring at the end of 2025.
We need our elected representatives to act and make the 20% small business tax deduction permanent, just like they permanently lowered the corporate tax rate.
The 20% small business tax deduction is good for small businesses.
And what's good for small business
Is good for America.
Please join the more than 30 million American small businesses
like me,
Like me.
like me, like me.
Tell Congress to make the 20% small business tax deduction permanent.
Now for more from our sponsor, please welcome Adam Temple, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the National Federation of Independent Business, in conversation with Kathleen Koch, contributing editor to The Hill.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Adam. First, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the NFIB? How are you different from, say, the Small Business Administration, Chamber of Commerce?
Sure. So NFIB, or the National Federation of Independent Business, is what we call the voice of small business, because it is. We are nonprofit, we're nonpartisan, and we're member-directed, meaning our legislative priorities are directed by our members. We survey them, they tell us what is most important to them, and those are the ones on which we advocate. And right now that is the 20% small business tax deduction, which is why we are here today, because we feel like it is the top priority among our members and the one in which we're fighting for.
You know, I thought that was pretty interesting. I was just chatting with one of your members from Nebraska about that, and she said, yes, we decide what the priorities are.
Absolutely.
And then you advocate for them. Well, I want to talk about the 20% small business deduction, and how it's impacting your members. But first, I'd like to give you a chance to comment if you had any thoughts on what the congressman just said.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I really appreciate their time coming here today. But what you heard is that there are definitely differing maybe perspectives or priorities, but the one thing that they agree on, and they both had a really healthy understanding of what a small business is. These are not large, big employers all the time. They're the mom and pops. They both seem to understand that. But regardless of how we get there or what next year looks like, this is a priority, and this is what they both understand the impact on small business. So that was encouraging to hear, and hopefully that turns into action.
So let's talk about your members, and I think we have several of them in the room, and they're going to be coming up and talking after us.
Yeah.
What are they telling you? How is this impacting them?
Well, what we hear when we meet with them around the country is that they've been able to add jobs, they've been able to grow their businesses, it helped them survive a pandemic, and it helps them reinvest back in their communities. So what we have learned, that's on sort of the anecdotal side. On the data side, EY did a study that just diving into what it would look like if the small business tax deduction was made permanent. What it found was that in the first 10 years, $750 billion in GDP would be added, that 1.2 million jobs per year would be added. And interestingly enough, in 2021, 26 million small businesses were able to claim this deduction. That's not 26 million businesses, but specifically small, not all of the ones that claim the deduction. So, 26 million small businesses is really hard to ignore, and that was just in 2021. So it'll be interesting to see as we progress, and if it's made permanent, how many more will benefit from it.
So just so I understand, so there are going to be these additional jobs. So I guess what you're saying is this would give businesses, if it were made permanent, the ability to really plan ahead.
Absolutely. Planning is huge. And let's not pretend like we have, again, a mom and pop, they're trying to make it through the next month, the next year, but they need to be able to have some level of certainty that they're going to be able to do that. Right now, if you look, the NFIB uncertainty index peaked in October. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the future looks like, and a lot of this is because they don't know what their taxes are going to look like after 2025. So the ability to give them more certainty that this is going to be locked in, it is something that they can rely on, they're going to continue to execute on those plans, versus if it goes away, they'll have to, or if they, with the lack of certainty that it might not stay, they'll have to make alternative plans or cut back.
In chatting with one of your members over there, she did say right now small businesses around the country are struggling because they can't plan They don't know what's going to happen after next year.
Yeah, yeah. And in an NFIB survey that we did among our members, what they told us was that if it's not made permanent, if it's allowed to expire, that 44% of them will postpone or cancel capital investments. More than a third of them will have to postpone or cancel hiring. And in a time of where inflation is a huge issue for all Americans, not just small businesses, 61% said they would have to look at raising prices. So that would have an impact across the economy.
That's just what I was going to ask you. How would that impact the economy?
I mean, obviously, if your goods, and we talk about goods a lot of times, but remember, this is goods and services. This is mom and pop, coffee shops, retailers, and things like that. But this is also your CPAs, your attorneys, a lot of those other goods and services type companies, and they're going to have to look at raising prices to be able to account for not having this tax deduction.
Now, the solution, Congressman Smucker is one of the co-sponsors, and I don't know that he went into great detail, but could you explain to us exactly what it would do? Is this a lengthy piece of legislation or something pretty simple? The
legislation, the Main Street Tax Certainty Act is a very simple piece of legislation. It just says make it permanent. That's obviously my summary. Okay. But
it's not really just one sentence.
It doesn't open it back up.
That's impossible in Washington.
But it's by Washington standards, it's pretty succinct.
Okay.
It simply makes it permanent. And so whether, that's the vehicle with which this is done or some other way, they talked about a whole lot of ways this might be able to happen. The priority is clearly that we need to make it permanent so that small businesses can continue to hire, invest in their businesses, expand, keep prices low, and invest back in their communities. That was another thing that both congressmen noted is these are the folks that are sponsoring the baseball teams, that are giving back to the local PTAs, doing those sorts of things. And so it allowed them to continue to contribute to their economies and their local communities in a way that we haven't been able to see before.
So based on not only what you heard here in the room, but your contact with lawmakers across Capitol Hill, how optimistic is NFIB that it will pass?
Well, I mean, you heard it today. Well, prognostication, especially after an election, can be a pretty scary proposition. But the encouraging thing is it's a no-brainer that people know that this helps small businesses, and people know that if it's not made permanent, they will be hurt by it. It's just how we get there. We have almost 200 bipartisan co-sponsors on the bill as the way it currently is. You heard bipartisan support for the principle today. So I think there's optimism. It's just how we get there and how quickly we get there. But we think that regardless of where you're coming from in Washington, you can see the benefit and why this is so important.
Right. You say how quickly we get there. I guess so that means getting Congress to make this a priority. It may be the top priority for your members, but not necessarily for them.
Well, absolutely, but that's why we're here. I mean, remember, 26 million small businesses. That's also 26 million constituents, not to remember their workers, their spouses, their families, and those sorts of things. So every member of Congress has constituents affected by this. Not to mention that small businesses make up half the economy, and so it's, there's the broader implications. So making it a top priority is what's important. There's going to be a lot of competing things in the next year. But this is one that everybody can agree on and that affects a huge number of people. 26 million is just really hard to ignore.
So as you try to get this, this legislation passed, how important is education? I know obviously your members are aware that this is about to expire.
Yeah.
But do you think small businesses across the board, all around the country, who may be taking advantage of this, are they all aware?
Definitely not. And that, I mean, like any other issue, a lot of times they're busy running their business, not looking at their 1040s. And so that's been one of the things that we've worked on, is making sure that small businesses are educated about what the benefit is that they receive. And every case that I've ever encountered, when they're able to look at it and see the number, they will immediately tell you this is important to me. Nobody has ever looked at their tax return and said, it's not that big a deal, I could do without it. So it's one of those things that we know that it's impacting them, but people understanding that it's impacting them. I do think awareness is increasing. You just saw the ad that ran. That's important that we make sure that we're educating not just NFIB members, but all small businesses and all folks across the country. And I think that is the awareness is increasing, but it's important that we do things like this here in D.C. We mentioned the Ways and Means road teams. We worked with those. We had NFIB members participating in those across the country. So both here in D.C. and back in the States, it's really important that we continue to communicate the importance of this to members of Congress.
So any thoughts on what those, say, in the room can do, or people watching who might want to advocate
Yeah, good
For or
point.
against?
Yeah, if you want to advocate against it, I would just recommend you not do that, or just find another issue to dig into. But we do have different audiences. Obviously, there's folks watching online. Some of those may be small businesses, because we've told a lot of folks that we're doing this. And what they didn't talk about today is the stories, and we're going to hear some stories here in a little bit. But if you're watching online, you own a small business, or you're a supporter of one, what we hear time and again is tell those stories. Write in, call, show up to events. They hear from folks like me all the time. They hear these figures and facts and these studies, and those are important. But the things that they remember are when somebody comes up to them and says, this deduction allowed me to do this. And it's not always building a huge piece of infrastructure, although that's the case sometimes. We heard from somebody in Pennsylvania just a couple weeks ago that it allowed them to buy a van that had air conditioning for their workers. So it's really brass tacks kind of stuff that can get done here. For those in the room, obviously, whether you're touching policy or helping craft it or advising, I would just say, to keep in mind what a small business really is. It's defined in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people and groups, but these are really small entities that rely on this. NFIB members are really around 7 to 8 employees, a lot of sole proprietorships, a lot of family-owned businesses. These are the folks that are impacted by this. There are a lot of other groups or companies that may be able to claim it, but the majority of these 26 million small businesses are truly small businesses on Main Street that are keeping our economy going.
Adam Temple, Senior Vice President for Advocacy for NFIB. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.